World leaders at the G7 summit are turning up the pressure on President Trump, urging him to ease tariffs that have strained global trade ties. While trade dominates the agenda, divisions have now emerged over how to respond to the escalating Israel-Iran conflict, with leaders split on calling for a ceasefire. From tariffs to tensions, the summit reveals a divided front facing urgent global challenges. For more, let's head to the States. We're joined by Oz Sultan from Sultan Interactive Group. Great to see you, Oz. Talk to us about these G7 leaders. What are they hoping to achieve at this summit? Because while we're talking about trade, there's a lot happening in the world.
So the big things are, one is rare earths. Everyone's moving towards EVs, and this is not just stateside, but this is pretty much across Europe. So there's a critical rare earth mineral strategy that's being laid out right now that the G7 leaders are working forward on. There's a trade deal that's being worked through, and that's between the United States and the United Kingdom. So Keir Starmer's kind of at the forefront of that. I think that's going to close inside of the next couple of days. And then we have the Middle East issue, that is continuing to bubble up. We're still seeing the conflict between Iran and Israel sort of bubbling. We're seeing different players inside of that arena picking sides. And we're seeing President Trump saying that he's pushing for some sort of a truce or a détente inside of the coming days. Ideally, that is going to involve, trade and sanction lifting, as well as questions on what's being done with nuclear power inside of Iran.
These are, I guess, some of the key points that have come from the first day. So Canada to lift defence budget to meet NATO goals, Carney seeking to end steel and aluminium tariffs, talks with Mexico aiming to ease the trade tensions there. Let's start with Canada lifting its budget, because we know that the Secretary of Defence and JD Vance and President Trump have all been calling for many of these other Western nations, particularly in Europe, particularly Canada and Australia, to lift GDP spending on military to 3% GDP at least. What are your views on this, and is Canada serious?
So Carney seems to be going on this likability offensive right now, trying to show that Canada still has a place at the table, and they've got a place inside of these international conflicts. We'll see if that actually turns into anything meaningful. A lot of what Trump has talked about is that most of these countries that pay less than 2% GDP need to kind of catch up with what they owe. So that's at least going to set some balance in terms of the conversations with the State Department. But the remainder of this is yet to be seen. We don't really have a concrete policy in terms of where we should be going with Ukraine. The opportunity to bring Russia back into the G7, I think, sets the stage for more diplomatic conversations on where we could go to wind down the Ukraine conflict. But you've still got a lot of differences on either side. Russia says they're going to keep these pieces. Ukraine says, no, we will not have peace without those pieces, mainly Crimea. So it's a bit of stalemate football that's going on. We'll kind of see how they get to the first down, but I think it's probably going to take a few more weeks before they get there.
Oh, it's beautifully awkward though, isn't it? Sitting here watching what's going on there. President Trump's kind of like the guy who rocks up to the dinner party and everyone's a bit like, oh, who invited him? But he's the person that has all the power when it comes to the trade conversations at least. Let's talk about, I just want to play you this clip of him talking, standing next to Mark Carney, speaking about the decision many years ago over Crimea to get rid of Russia from what was the G8. Let's have a
The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago. But it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table. So it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war.
It's a really interesting point, isn't it, Oz? I often feel like when President Trump is talking about President Putin, he's using the media, and we're all listening, but he's not talking to us. he's sending a message to President Putin and the Kremlin. What are your views on what he just said?
I think it's clear. You know, there's three issues here. One is that Ukraine gave up their weapons. Two is what Obama did in terms of kicking Russia out, and the third is the response in 2014, which was the taking of Crimea, which really kind of set the stage for what we ended up with the Ukraine conflict much later after that. The issues at hand right now are, I think, if Russia sees that they have a seat at the table in terms of the international community again, and they're not so fully ostracized, both economically and politically, from the international community, that we're more than likely to start moving towards some sort of a truce. What comes after that, there's a tremendous amount of detail that'll probably take quite a bit of time and a few diplomats to work out. But if we can kind of get to a ceasefire, that sets the stage for what's next. And that sort of underscores what's also going on in the Middle East, right? You know, can we get to ceasefires on multiple fronts? Can we start building towards peace? And can we start building towards what I think all of these nations would want, which is increased trade and increased stability inside of both regions?
All right, Sultan, we'll leave it there for now. Appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.